Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, Ms. Dina, and my warm greetings to all of you from down under. Thank you so much to Simio Checheb and to Governing Board and to everybody else from Simio countries and all around the world who are tuning in and listening to these wonderful speakers at this conference, at these webinars, to talk about issues that are quite pertinent to our current, not only global, but also local positioning. Lessons from Lockdown for Early Child Education, a View from Down Under is the title of my short talk, and I really welcome your comments or you connecting with me. So I have included my contact details on a slide. As a keynote speaker at this conference, I was asked to present on a couple of issues which I have listed here. Particularly on the topic embracing a new normal and the questions around what does this social distancing mean for learning and play, and what's going to happen with the parents, how they deal with the balancing work and child raising and child rearing, and what's going to happen with the marginalized communities. And I thought that I'm going to sort of produce a very short thought piece that will try to somehow present some of these issues. But first of all, because I'm from New Zealand, I have to say that New Zealand has done really well in a COVID-19 crisis. We had, you can see the graph, which sort of positions New Zealand as starting at one point, but as now for 20 days having no new active cases in New Zealand. And we have moved to alert level 1 now, which means the life is just as before the pandemic started, but the borders remain tight sealed and closed. And we had this notion that our government, and I have to say our female leader, which I think is very important for those of us in education, to understand the power and importance of a female leader and of a mother. She went hard and she went early. And we were in a complete lockdown for about 4 weeks, and we have managed to eliminate the virus. And however, what I'm going to talk about is not about the virus, but what was left after the virus has disappeared. And I want to present to you some of those lessons from the lockdown. What have we learned? And what have we learned is that technologies, they do not fix educational problems. We've been all became addicted and linked with technologies, and everybody became educated through and connected via online services. And it sort of seems like technology is going to resolve all the issues that were part of the educational system. There was almost some excitement with some educationalists who saw this as an opportunity. But I would argue, and I would want to say that it didn't necessarily fix our educational problems. It has particularly enhanced them and showed us what we were dealing before we went to lockdown. The second is that parents are the first teachers indeed. We always knew that, and we always say that. And I'm myself a former early childhood teacher, so I know that we all say that parents are the first teachers, but we really entered the situation where no matter whether it was in cities or in rural areas, whether it was a wealthy country or whether it was a developing country, parents became locked in with their children and spent substantial time with them and became their first teachers. I mean, there's broad particular challenges, and there's broad particular for some parents to really reconnect with their children. But most importantly, it showed the connection between parents and children cannot be in a world post-COVID-19 underestimated, and we need to return to that idea that parent-teacher partnerships are really essential for successful early child education. The other thing that we learned is that we really need a place, space, and bodies in education. We abandoned schools and abandoned playgrounds and abandoned early childhood centers and places and spaces of learning and joy and of play. They cannot be replaced by online link and experience. There is something about body in education and the way we learn just by observing, watching, making a wink, or just making a connection with each other just by being in a close proximity. for young children by touching things and playing with each other, whether it's running around or gently exploring each other's physicality. So it's really important not to forget that play, space, and bodies are very much connected, an essential part of education, and that's what we learned. That's what our children were missing the most. What have we also learned on a sort of more structural point is that communities can work together, support each other, and they can offer particular kindness. They can be kind to each other, and they can be kind to each other in a way that was unexpected beforehand. The cheering, the signs, the bear hunts that many countries have experienced, the checking on your neighbors and making sure that despite we couldn't be physically together, we maintain social closeness is really, really important. And I wonder whether what we've learned from this is that we need to carry it with us into the post-COVID-19 world. What we've learned in this pandemic needs to be really essential for our early childhood care and services and for our community overall, really pertinent towards future. What we also learned is the language, and that physical distancing is not the same as social distancing. We've been somehow led to believe that, and I heard it everywhere in the discourse, and it's in the media, it's in the newspapers, it's in seminars. We're talking about that we are in a time of social distancing. I strongly disagree. I think we are in a time of physical distancing, and we may be keeping a 2-meter distance, or as the United Nations supposed to show you, it's the size of a bear, which I quite love. And it's the social distancing that's really is happening. It's a social distancing that really shouldn't be happening. It's that kind neighbor, that image of a neighbor reading the book to a child on a balcony who lives next door. That's we can't afford to have any form of social distancing or marginalizing anybody in this time. We need to stay away from each other bodily wise, but we need to maintain social connectivity. And the final point that I want to raise is troubling new normality. I know this seminar and this conference is called New Normality, but I do wonder what's normal about this. The playgrounds, which are sort of covered with crime tape, or if it's empty classrooms and spaces where children play, there's nothing normal about that. And I want to trouble that new normality because I refuse to accept that this will be our new normality. And it also makes me wonder whether what we had before COVID-19 was normal. And a lot of us working in education, we know how many struggles we had with that system and what was happening at that time. So I don't want to accept new normality. I want to challenge it. I want to make sure that we understand that this is very unusual, unprecedented time for our communities and our local and global environment. And we can really make some kind of change about it and move from it, learn from it, support each other, and enter into the space that will become a new normality. But it's not going to be these empty spaces and distancing. So those lessons, what became really visible? For me, it is, and I understand that Dr. Adriani talked about it, it's enhanced inequalities. Really, the COVID-19, if it has done something for our community, it has enhanced inequalities, both educational but also class-based. It has really perpetuated the idea of urban-rural divide and what was happening for children in urban and rural areas, and what was happening also in different counties, countries, and communities. And also there were quite strong ethnicities divide. The second thing is that we started this year by a huge planetary crisis, bushfires in Australia, huge climate change summits, and we sort of tend to forget about that with this kind of human crisis. And I have to say that we can't forget about it. It really remains the most significant issue that we face. And post-virus, post-COVID-19, we're going to be facing these issues. And it's our youngest children that's going to have to be marching and that have to be demanding the better planet for themselves and for their educational future. And the third point is that we really need a high-quality education and research on COVID-19 and what kind of impact it had on children, childhoods, education, and parenting. We are lacking that research. We have a lot of evidence, which I would call anecdotal evidence, and there is a lot of experience, but how to translate it into something that's really powerful and evidence-based, in the best sense of word, I'm using evidence-based research on COVID-19 and what it really means. And that's a wink sort of to Simio Čečep, because that's a great area that they can further pursue, and I'm sure other advisory board members would agree. So to finish up, what are the recommendations from the lockdown, the way I see it? I think that education requires both philosophical and structural attention. And it's not only early childhood, it's the overall education. I think it needed that attention for some time, but COVID-19 has helped us to really understand the issues that are with early child education per se, both philosophically, but also structurally. We also learned that the whole online digital distance forms of education that sort of came to us overnight will not resolve those existing issues that we had. And therefore, we need to look elsewhere for that fix, if that fix actually exists for our education. Quality content of education, policy, investment into education, working conditions of teachers, professionalism, partnerships that we create, children's rights, school readiness, etc. All those issues, they remain to be discussed and researched and implemented in these partnerships. We can't forget about them. We can't lose track of those research projects that were happening before COVID-19. We need to carry them through because they really matter and they will come back. And as a final point, to connect and to collaborate with all stakeholders, both nationally and internationally, is really important. And that's a main lesson from the lockdown. We can do it in various forms and various shapes, but we need to do it with all stakeholders, with children, parents, with the policymakers, with the people from the Ministry of Education, with international teachers and groups and professors and so on. We all are in it together and we can collaborate. So to finish off, I just want to really finish up with 3 quotes that I quite like, and they talk about the educational futures, all of them. And I think we do need to look at the educational futures in a time of COVID-19. They sort of link to the idea of philosophy of education, and I purposefully looking at 3 people that are from very different times and from very different worlds, because this is a global issue. We got Aristotle from the from the old Greek white philosopher that sort of argues that the educated differ from the uneducated as much as the living from the dead. And we know it, and we know that it's really important for our young children. And then we have a John Dewey, who is a very famous thinker and philosopher, American progressive educational philosopher, who says that education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. And boy, don't we just all know it right now, how education is the life itself for parents, teachers, and for children. And then we have a Nelson Mandela, who sort of presents that kind of non-Western, non-white perspective for me, coming from that idea of a struggle being part of that environment, who argues that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So we cannot forget about education, because it really is the most powerful weapon. And I'm going to leave it there, and thank you so much. I much appreciate it, and welcome any comments or contacts from any of you